Hi folks, Steven here. So this is another one of our Pokemon side game music discussions. I'm here with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. So before we start the actual discussion, just so that folks have a little bit of time to get in here, we're going to go over a little bit of news in the Pokemon music world over the last couple weeks. I think it was just announced recently that Project Voltage, oh gosh, I can't remember her name again.
Hatsune Miku.
Miku is going to be getting a few additional tracks, maybe some that just didn't fit into the type-based configuration that they had there. So I think that might be part of it. Let's see. We will eventually do a discussion on both that and Pokemon Music Collective, probably as a combo episode. We'll pick out a couple tracks and talk about that at some point. And let's see. I thought in the trading card game, I guess we may as well toss this in here. So they've used this attack name before, but the Stellar Crown pre-releases, I think, are this weekend and maybe next weekend, or was it last weekend, or whatever. But in any case, if you take a look here, yes, they have this attack named Everyone Explode Now. So I don't know why they make this reference, but obviously that's a reference to the early 90s track, Gonna Make You Sweat. Everybody Dance Now. So I'm not sure how because they've done that before with a Fortress, now they're doing it with a Drifblim. So it's kind of strange that they have a musical moniker there, but I'll take it. So those were kind of the things. And anything else you want to cover? And also, how's your podcast coming along?
Well, we took an accidental hiatus for the summer because my microphone died, and I had my farmer's market, and also movie 7 is coming around the corner. So, but we're back on track this week. So you'll all get the lovely adventures of Mace Torchic coming at y'all soon.
Good to hear. Well, as far as this episode, tonight we'll be talking about the music of Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon, which kind of unfortunately is the last original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game we've gotten. They did put the Game Boy Advance Red Rescue Team on Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack just before Worlds. I had kind of hoped they were going to announce something at Worlds. We will not be doing a big discussion today about all the stuff they did not announce at Worlds, which was sort of our original
the internet already has
idea.
that.
Yeah, so we will be doing more of an actual discussion. But if you have any thoughts on this game as we go along, we'll try to work those in. Go ahead and type those in the comments. But I think with that stuff out of the way, we've done enough there. Let's go ahead and get our recording setup started, and we can do this. This is, of course, the live version. It's not the clean, polished version that you get on the podcast feed. So, of course, there's going to be some flubs, pauses, and whatnot. We appreciate your patience.
What are you talking about? We're beautiful and perfect all the time.
So let's see here. First off, let me go ahead. See what our levels look like on my end. Anne, can you talk for just a moment?
Yes, talking into my lovely brand new microphone.
Okay, I'm going to move that down a bit and then move that up a bit. Okay. All right. I think we've got some good levels there. So I'll start my recording right now. And so leave a little pause. I assume you're ready on your end, Anne.
Yes.
Okay, so leave a little pause and I'll do an introduction. Sometimes, by the way, also we need to do multiple takes of some of these things. So, okay, let me scroll up to the top of my notes so I make sure I have that. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And we're continuing our look at Pokemon side games and their music specifically. And we've reached Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon for the 3DS. Now, this is the last original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game. They did release, of course, Rescue Team DX on the Switch. And we're recording this a couple weeks after the 2024 Pokemon World Championships. And just before that, they did release the original Red Rescue Team Game Boy Advance version on Nintendo Switch Online if you have the expansion pack. Kind of hoping that would lead into something a little bit more, but unfortunately thus far haven't heard anything. But as far as this game being released, let's see, it was released in Japan in September of 2015, the US in November of 2015, and Europe and Australia got it in early 2016 in February. So, I'm not sure if this was a huge deal coming out. It was a decent deal. This was before Pokemon would go on a string of trying to release a new mainline game, at least one per year, starting in 2016, which is kind of bitten them in the rear, of course. But Anne, do you remember anything pre-release about this game or as it was coming out?
I actually don't. Like many of the mystery dungeons, like I was kind of just not on that train, but like I think this one and maybe the last one we talked about are two where it's like I don't know if I even remember them coming out. That's kind of how little they were hyped in general circles. So
Well, when this came out, I did pick it up digitally. I don't know if that was when it came out or as a Christmas gift. Now, one interesting thing is you would not have heard music from the game on PIRN because PIRN's host service, Live365, went through bankruptcy at the end of 2015. And I haven't never reinstated the station under their new leadership and stuff like that because I had moved on to other things. But as far as the game itself, I mean, I played through it there, did a lot of stuff with it over time. However, when I went back to look at it for this retrospective, if I try to launch the digital version on my 3DS, the system crashes. Not just the game, the entire system crashes, has to be powered down and then powered back up. So I'm guessing either the game file is corrupt, or the save file is corrupt, or there's just some weird bug about where I left it the last time I played it, and it just can't boot up properly. I think you can still re-download the games, but I'd have to delete it and then re-download it, and that was more than I was willing to do. Especially the state the 3DS, the eShop doesn't, you can't really buy anything there anyway. So what I ended up doing, we were, as I said, recording this a few weeks after the Pokemon World Championships, which were in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I took some time on Sunday to hit up some book-off stores in there, and I managed to pick up a copy of this game at one of them, cartridge only, and that works. I don't know why. It has a separate save file. I don't know if they started playing the game, didn't get very far, or just restarted the game and then put it down for whatever reason, but the save file was pretty early in the game, so I ended up playing through most of this game again for this one. And given that I haven't really wanted to put it down too much, I think that says some good things about it, but we'll talk more about all of that in our music and game discussions that we're going to do here.
that's awesome. I love Book Off. It always comes through.
Yeah, obviously I shopped a lot there the prior year in 2023 since I had a lot of free time at that year's Worlds. But in any case, as far as who's behind this, it's the usual folks. Spike Chunsoft is the developer, and Pokemon Company publishes it, of course. As far as the people involved, if you've played Gates to Infinity, a couple of the same names do show up. Keisuke Ito, Yasuhiro Kawagoe. But there is one new name, and I hope I got those other names somewhat correct with that. Noriko. Sorry. But there is one new name.
Okay, sorry.
But there is one new name. Noriko Murakami. I hope I got that kind of close-ish. Is the new person on here. I found a couple credits for her. I don't know if these are anime or games or maybe some of both, but Valkyrie Drive and Kurara Fantasia, and you apparently found a couple others. We don't have a ton of biographical information, but what did you dig up on her?
Yeah, as you say, mostly just her IMDb and her just general credits. She does seem to have do not only games but also drama CDs, which is sometimes I don't know how to explain this, but sometimes OVAs of anime or light novels or video games as well will have a a small story that's voice acted, kind of like a radio play. So that is what I think the drama CDs are for her is like a lot of them might be associated with games, but they may not be associated with other things. But like it'll be kind of just a music and character songs of the people in whatever game it was or whatever anime it was.
Yeah, perhaps this is one of the first things she's worked on, possibly, so maybe more in the future from that individual. As far as the overall style, I mean, it's pretty consistent with the other Mystery Dungeon games, particularly Gates to Infinity, since that was on the same hardware. So maybe not a ton to report there. I think we'll have some specific thoughts on some of these tracks here, but and I assume you agree with all that.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a fair bit of range in the series, of course, but definitely that Celtic influence is still hanging around there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
In any case, we've done what we usually do here. We've each picked out 3 tracks. Let's see, I picked out Lively Town, Fire Island Volcano, and Calm Craggy Area. And what were your 3 tracks?
I picked Let's Go to School, Nectar Meadow, and Prehistoric Ruins.
Yeah, now we do try to do these in roughly chronological order, but I did fudge it a little bit so I don't have 3 in a row. So the first one we're actually going to talk about is Let's Go to School. There is an actual school portion in the early part of this game. And what kind of stuck out to you about this particular track?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that. Which one am I starting on?
Let's Go to School.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, what struck me out about this one was it felt not so much underproduced, but like slightly less instrumentation, like simpler in a way. It almost sounded like something that I would have heard at my daycare when I worked in Japan, of like singing the walking song and the like. And it's very jaunty and fun. But it also has a bit of a beach sort of sound to it. Like I imagine this is maybe a song Ash sang on his way to school in Alola, maybe. But there's like a pan flute, and like instrumentation that some of it is like synths and strings and like, but for the most part it sounds like simple instruments that like you could play at a elementary school, and it's very charming that way.
Yeah, that seems pretty fair to me. I mean, I noticed, yeah, you talked about walking like in step or something like that, I think. But it definitely feels like the instruments, for the most part, there's a little bit of disorganization, of course, but there's also some, in rhythm stuff. So it kind of does help it give off a schooly vibe, for lack of a better term. What else did you want to point out about this one, Anne?
I kind of picked it mostly for the contrast. Like I do think there are other tracks in the entire soundtrack that are similar to it, but compared to a lot of the other ones we picked, like this just has a very stripped away sort of sound by comparison. It's not as lush of an instrumentation.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. All right, well, let's move on to one of my picks. This is Lively Town. So every Mystery Dungeon game pretty much has some sort of central hub area, but this one goes a bit further. There's a number of continents, and pretty much all of them have some sort of hub town that represents that continent. And you start on the water continent, which Lively Town is the main, I guess you call it, city there. So what kind of struck me about this one is there's in terms of instruments, there's horns and winds, and various other stuff. But you definitely get the feeling, especially compared to the Serene Village where you start the game, that this is a busier place, more comings and goings. And in fact, like all the major towns in this game have a port of some sort. And that's all sort of caught up in the mix there. And I assume you noticed some similar things?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a busier compared to the Serene area. Like, I really liked what sounded kind of steel vibraphone or marimba-y sounds. Like, it felt very, like, bustling, but also a little bit of laid back, like, not aggressive bustling. And in a way, it kind of reminded me of Pokemon Concierge. Or at least that's, like, I don't know if it necessarily sounds exactly like those tracks, but the visual I got in my head was, we're going to the Pokemon Spa Hotel.
Yeah, it's probably not as tropical in that regard. In fact, the other continents, let's say there's a grass continent, there's a desert continent, a mist one, and a few other locations around the game world there. But this one, sorry, let me rewind a bit there. Yeah, I don't know that it's as tropical as Pokemon. Certainly not as relaxing as Pokemon Concierge usually is, or at least the face that area tries to put forward. Obviously, if you've seen the show, you know that there's plenty of hijinks in there, and I'm glad we're getting more of that series eventually. But yeah, like I said, I don't know that it works well. I think as a city track, even though in terms of physical size, like even going back to maybe like Saffron City in the original games, I think might technically be a larger city with more places in there. But I think it does do a good job of showing that, yes, there is a sort of a bigger world out there, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, Anne, here's another one of yours. This is Nectar Meadow. This is a dungeon theme from fairly early in the game. I have a few comments on this, but I'll let you get the first word in.
Yeah, well, for being a, quote, dungeon theme, this is what you expect the Nectar Meadow to be. It is serene. It starts out with some strings, and then the winds come in. I really love the melody that the flute or ocarina, whatever the wind instrument is that takes the melody. That lead is really quite pretty. And like an orchestra moves in after a while with some lower tones, but like it's very high on the treble instruments and the higher instruments and like little bells and delicate flute sounds. So the track seems to sparkle in a way that makes when the lower wind instruments finally do come in, it's just all the more satisfying. So this is just a very sweet track.
I have some similar notes on this one. Yeah, there's fluttering instruments, which kind of makes sense for the Nectar Meadow. You would expect a lot of bees and butterflies and, in Pokemon form, of course. Also a sense of wonder, mystery. I did want to kind of compare it to a track that we discussed with Gates to Infinity, which is the Inflora Forest, and I think this one has a much more open feel, which I think makes sense for it being, a nectar meadow with. There's got to be more flowers and maybe fewer trees or so on and so forth there. So that's one reason it has a different feel. I don't know, Anne, did you want to expand on that comparison in any particular
that's
way?
an interesting callback. Yeah, like it does kind of share some similarities in vibe. That's kind of cool.
All right, well, those are the main things I wanted to get across with that track. So the next one is a very important story dungeon. This is Fire Island Volcano. No, it's not a reenactment of Pokemon 2000. We have Entei in this dungeon, not Moltres, although I think Moltres definitely shows up in this game. We'll talk about the incredible breadth of content in our game discussion. But this one has sort of a bit of an intro with, I guess, a didgeridoo. And I think there's a structural reason for that. And then it goes into this, I guess I can only really, the two-word description I came up with was Fire River Dance. First, about that intro, though, this is one of the dungeons. I think there are a couple other songs like this in the soundtrack. And sorry, 1 second here. There are a couple other songs like this in the soundtrack, and I think part of the reason is there's a little bit of a pre-staging area with this one, as some of the story dungeons have, where you get access to like the deposit box and where you can, deposit or withdraw money or items or stuff like that. And they expect you to spend a little bit of time there reading dialogue and whatnot before you get into the actual dungeon. I think that's part of the reason there's a little bit of an intro here. And then, like I said, it eventually gets to this Fire River Dance thing, because, It sounds like a little bit like some of the content from that 90s traveling show, Riverdance, I suppose, and stylistically, and that's bringing in that Celtic influence that with the more rapid beats than some of the other stuff. And certainly keeps you on your toes, I guess, is what I'm going there. And similar observations?
Very similar. I was expecting Michael Flatley to show up as Lord of the Dance. But yeah, like it's just so fascinating. We start with a didgeridoo, then we get like Irish fiddle, and then like the chanters from bagpipes come in. I didn't hear the drones of the bagpipes, which makes me sad because bagpipes are the music of my people. But Oh gosh, like there was like a part where there was like a fiddle playing and then the chanter echoed like a call and answer, or maybe it was the other way around, I don't remember. But that was so cool, and it was like such an interesting blend of musical and cultural instruments that is wild and beautiful, and I love that you can do that in a fictional world.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And I should mention, we talked about Entei being the boss's area. The boss theme does incorporate certain elements of the dungeon track, which is not entirely unsurprising. Although I'm not sure how well, like when I think of Entei, maybe I think of stuff from like the third movie and some of the other stuff that maybe isn't quite this energetic. So maybe it works for the dungeon more than the boss. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Ooh, I don't know. Because I genuinely love this track and do think it has a sense of gravitas and energy to it that you could use for the battle as well as the dungeon. So I'm a little bit on the fence. I think it could work with either.
Yeah, a little bit of a question mark there. Not a bad song. In fact, this is almost certainly one of the most popular songs from this game in terms of new music, anyway. But let's move on to something a little bit later in the game, in the, I guess, required dystopian arc of the game as it moves through its plot. We have a number of dungeons that are very sparse and empty in terms of their music to varying degrees. And one of those is the calm, craggy area. And this one I just kind of wanted to point out structurally. It has some good parts to it, but the structure is kind of what sort of grabbed me. First of all, it has a long, sparse phase at the beginning, and I think this is another one of those dungeons where you have sort of a chamber where the music starts playing before you go into the actual dungeon where you can access the deposit box. And that part actually reminds me a lot of sort of the Metroid Prime game soundtracks that have this sort of, ruin/spacey vibe. Excuse me. And then it has a few more, but Anne, any thoughts first on that first part of the song?
Yeah, I really love that kind of eerie woo 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 sort of beginning, and then the very quiet lead synth melody. Um, I do like it's like I don't know if calm is the right word because it kind of makes me feel a little uncomfortable and not calm at all. And everybody in the YouTube comments says that this area lies. Apparently, it is very stressful and not calm at all. So maybe that fits.
Definitely some tough enemies. We'll talk more about maybe the mechanics in our game discussion, but it then moves on to this middle phase, which I'm sure there's a term for this type of music. And I think on this replay, one of the reasons it stood out to me is it reminded me of another game. It's coming to Switch later this year, but it's been out on other platforms since earlier this year. It actually reminds me of the credits theme to Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2, which I have not played, but I've watched a lot of footage of. And the credits theme is pretty interesting and has similar instrumentation to this section. I don't know if you're familiar with any of that, Anne, but...
I mean, I'm familiar with the Five Nights at Freddy's theme song because Vocaloid. But other than that, I'm not familiar.
I would maybe describe it that second middle phase as perfumey, and it kind of reminds me of that other song which I have wanted to use on my radio show for a while, and I had to check and see if they finally put out the soundtrack to the game. And then it sort of transitions into, there might be a second and a half phase, but there's also this sort of, I put down classic PMD tension, like it's almost something from like the Game Boy Advance / DS era of the franchise with the tones that sort of create tension up and down like that. Did that catch you before it goes around in loops again, Anne?
You know, that makes a lot of sense. Like when people talk about the Mystery Dungeon series and the things they laud about it, which is like its tone and its sudden ability to go into very emotional territory. This is a track that can kind of take you there and carry that weight. So that makes sense. Yeah.
So that was kind of a whirlwind of a track there. I mean, not that they don't fit together at all, but they're definitely very distinct sections of this particular track. And that was one reason why it stood out to me. All right, well, Anne, you have your third track coming up. This is the prehistoric ruins, which has some interesting dynamics, structurally with how it appears in the game. But I'll let you go ahead and uh, say what you want to say. Sorry, I'll let you. Let me just think about how I want to phrase that. But I'll give you the first chance to talk about why it hit your radar there.
Yeah, so this is another track that has a lot of different sections and it really builds. So it starts off with just this bass and like, oh, it just low notes so low they have shaken the bones in your rib cage. And then a flute kind of enters the picture, and then a drum section enters the picture, and then it starts vocalizations and like a more lush orchestra, and like it sounds almost like a bit of a choir in the background, just like the track just really builds over time, and then the melody that goes over the top of it is like, it's not a catchy melody. It's very complicated, lots of playing around with dissonant notes and notes that aren't in the chord, and lots of heavy bells, like not the little delicate bells in Nectar Meadow, but like the big clarion clanging bells. So it's a very dramatic track, but a track that like I mean, it starts with the drama, but then it builds like to just be able to lift all of that drama up and throw it at you, kind of.
Yeah, I have a couple notes for this one that probably tie into yours pretty well, but um, without getting too spoilery, this dungeon is kind of interesting in that you go to it after some other people you know have already been to it. So that gives it a bit of a different vibe than if you were going to it fresh, obviously.
Huh.
So yeah, structurally, we'll talk maybe more about that in the game discussion. But it definitely has a fair bit of tension with piano and bells. I mentioned, I think it's a flute, and I think like there's some definite like classic RPG, like you're looking at the Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1 era influence in here. I felt a little bit of maybe Chrono Trigger in there, which
Yeah.
we heard about out in the Explorers games, which actually involved time travel. So maybe that was something there, but it comes back again here. What else? Anything else you wanted to make sure people noted about this track, Ann?
Oh, well, yeah, now that you've got me thinking about, yeah, classic old school Nintendo games and the sensibilities of the music for like the big boss or the big castle or whatever. Yeah, I'm starting to see some of those reflections in it. So you're right. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think you know. I guess we want maybe spend a little time on the sound effects. Those are pretty similar. If you've played Gates to Infinity, it's pretty similar to what you're going to get there since it is on the same hardware and whatnot. Um, let's see. As far as like overall opinion, I mean, the only Mystery Dungeon that people would say maybe has an actual like bad soundtrack would be like those Japanese only WiiWare ones that borrow that where the best music is mostly stuff that was borrowed from other the DS games and so on and so forth. This one's pretty good. It's got some great standout tracks. I would say, however, I think if we were comparing the new music for this game, so not the stuff brought from other ones, whether it's as is or as a remix, but just the original music for this game versus the original music for Gates to Infinity, I think Gates to Infinity has some more interesting tracks, certainly ones that struck me. Now, some of that may just be that I never, ripped the sound test on this game because I never had a chance to use it on PIRN back in the day. I did play plenty of this game. I got through most of the content, of which there is quite a bit, which we will talk about. But Anne, did you have an opinion one way or the other?
Um, it's kind of hard to say because, like all the other ones in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, like there are so many tracks and so many of them are good and I love listening to them on their own. All of them serve the story. But because there are so many, there are a lot of them that I'm just kind of like meh about, like when I'm listening to them on my own. So it's kind of like hard to compare each game against the others for me, just because the breadth is so huge. But I think this is really quite good. It's kind of got a unifying vision for it because like even though it's not a huge factor, and there's lots of different areas. Like a lot of tracks kind of had a sort of islandy beach coastal vibe, which like just I don't know. There was something about it that kind of read that way to me in my mind, that kind of seemed to tie the whole thing together. So I liked that. And the Fire Island volcano, like on its own, is just an amazing track. That might be the best track we've ever found in the entire years of us doing this series. Like I love that track. It's so amazing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I won't disagree with you that Fire Island Volcano is really good. Not sure I would laud it quite as much as you did, since there's so much, especially since we've gone through so much here.
Mm,
But like if you're comparing how much I like the three tracks I picked out for this one versus Gates to Infinity, I think Gates to Infinity comes out ahead. But certainly, not a bad soundtrack, as you would expect. You'd expect
right.
them to bring very good stuff there. But if you think we missed anything, and boy, with a soundtrack if you exclude the stuff that was from prior Mystery Dungeon games and stuff, I think there's probably still like 100 tracks that are new or mostly new in this game. So yeah, we probably missed something, but you can always let us know. If you're watching one of these live, please do give us a comment. We will try to work that in. Otherwise, you can drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com. At PokePress on Twitter. I refuse to call it, well, I'll toss X in there, but to me, it's always Twitter's the better name.
Right?
And if you're watching one of these videos on replay or whatever, please do give us a comment. We will try to work that into a future discussion. But speaking of feedback, now this being recorded a couple of weeks after the 2024 Worlds, I was partially afraid we'd have to talk about the kind of lack of interesting announcements there and sort of talk about how the Pokemon Company does and doesn't announce stuff sometimes. But thankfully, we got something better and probably more timeless to talk about. Let me go ahead and punch up the slides for that. Yeah. Sorry, folks at home. Hit the hide, then move my cursor up. All right. So this is from on Twitter, like I said, the Griffin88. So this was a reply to a post about there's things on Twitter where people will post out basically just kind of fishing for comments. To be honest, that's the worst thing ever, but it is what it is. The name of a series or TV show or whatever as sort of like an open question or something. But the Griffin88, I guess it's from the New York City area, had an interesting story. So his dad is a musician professionally and had a production studio back in the late 90s that was sort of did a lot of stuff under or with Universal Music at the time. And apparently this was in like late 98, early 99 or something. He says it's about a year or so before the movie came out. His dad got a videotape of various scenes from the movie in Japanese, and it was basically saying, do you have any songs that might fit these themes? Do you have any interest in writing a song? And noticing this on there, I said, okay, I got to see what else I can learn here, because sounds like a great story. So we sort of go on from there. You can see if you're watching this live, you can see some of the actual stuff there. Now, it turns out that this guy's dad never really submitted anything. They didn't feel they were the right people for the job. But we learned a little bit more about them and the tape. Yeah, this tape was like, it had like those time code numbers you see on some tapes, especially from the pre-digital era. So they knew they were getting some stuff for synchronization, like the that's important for stuff like music for like synchronization purposes, and so on and so forth. But let's see. It says that they were unfinished. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but just sort of going through here. But the reason this guy's dad got asked appears to go from back in 1990. There was a live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. There would be two more of those in the 90s. And he had written a song for that. I think it might, I forget exactly where it would have played in the movie, but that's a classic, kids movie with a classic soundtrack in its own right. And he actually um, got an award for that work on the Ninja Turtles movie. So it's not surprising they would come around again and say, "Hey, do you have anything or want to work on this project?" Like you said, he says probably not the right people for it, and but he thinks they did a pretty good job when the actual movie came out. Um, Griffin has a funny story about that Ninja Turtles. I guess he was a little too young to remember when that movie came out, but he has a poster for that award that he got or whatever it was. And the picture, I guess probably the film movie poster or album cover, the soundtrack or whatever, uh, kind of scared him a little bit. So, which is kind of funny. One thing I suggest here in this phrase, first of all, get that tape archived if they can. Maybe send it over. If you can't do it yourself, maybe send it over to the Video Game History Foundation, because I'm sure they would be interested in it, almost certainly. Yeah, Every Heart Needs a Home was, I guess, the name of the Ninja Turtles
Aw.
song. Um, but in any case, yeah, he went on to talk. He found out about this live stream, so he's either catching it live or perhaps on replay, but talks about how he sort of bonded with his dad through video game music as well. The Gerudo Valley led his dad to sort of the song from Ocarina of Time sort of led his dad to sort of introduce him to a similar-ish like band, the Gypsy Kings. So really neat story there. Now there's a couple things I want to add on here. Whoops. Yeah, I don't want to spoil our next episode there just yet. So you didn't see that, folks, in the chat room. But in any case, the fact that this is someone with a record of having a kids film with a song in it makes a lot of sense if you look at some of the other folks we've that have come into orbit. So, for example, back in 2017, I had a chance to interview Mark Muller, who is the co-writer of Somewhere Someday. He was contacted because they were looking for songs, and he sort of pointed out, hey, there's a version of this song. Think you might like it. There's a version originally by Jennifer Page. It was covered by NSYNC. Think this might be up your alley. And, of course, Mark Muller is well known as the guy who co-wrote back in the 80s the theme songs for DuckTales and Rescue Rangers. So that's probably how he came into orbit. You have folks, We're a Miracle was co-written by David Zippel, who of course did, many of the songs for Hercules and Mulan and various other things. So that kind of tracks there. I get the feeling that some of these other ones, both for the first and second movie, might also have been associates or close friends of some of the folks who worked either at the record label or so on and so forth. But it definitely tracks with who you wonder. And I wouldn't be surprised if a couple more of the stories from the first and second movie go like that, where they talk to someone who was, excuse me, had a history with that. Anne, I've been going at the mouth for a while here. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Go ahead and any thoughts on this?
I don't know where to start. Like, this is just such an awesome story, and like it. I mean, I can kind of see where they were coming from in, like, say, passing on the project, but like, I do think like there is room in the Pokemon world for R&B, and like maybe it would have taken a bit more time than that particular company had at the moment, to sit down and write a song. But like, what an interesting world we would have lived in if they had written an R&B song for the movie. I don't know. And it just reminds me of my own childhood, because our childhood friend of the family, like, he worked in entertainment. I don't remember exactly what he did at every moment of his life, but he got a lot of screeners and like unfinished projects that, again, had the editing purposes samples under this, like the watermark over it, all sorts of interesting things that sometimes he would invite us over with his kids to watch, and we'd get to see like the new thing that wasn't quite out yet. And like the joy that brings when you're a kid, like, truly cannot be explained. Like, it's such a fun thing. Like, as he says, like, it was all in Japanese, but we didn't care. It was Pokemon. It's like, I understand that sentiment perfectly. Oh gosh. So how cool. What a cool job your dad had. Like, what a fun way to
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, so I love stories like this about the coming out about it says about a year before the movie came out. I'm not sure if that would be the theatrical or home video Western release, but all the same, it was they must have started looking for stuff very shortly after the film was greenlit for localization, and so on and so forth. And it's neat to hear, even though this didn't technically end up in a you know case where there was a song submitted or anything like that. Still learned a lot about the process. I'm sure is a little bit different. You talk about we have our suspicions. Yes, there was that sins, a couple sin songs in Secret to the Jungle, but our suspicion is that Pokemon 25, the album, was supposed to tie into that, and if it weren't for that darn pandemic, that might have
Pesky
actually
Panini.
happened because there's several songs on that album that seem like they could go with that movie. So process I'm sure is a little bit different today with things being more digital and stuff like that, and sure a lot of that happens on LinkedIn and other social media stuff behind the scenes perhaps. But yeah, it's kind of neat. Like I said, I would love to know what specific scenes were on that tape. If you're listening, the Griffin 88, try and get it archived. He thinks his dad thinks they may still have it somewhere around. Like I said, try to get that archived somewhere. So all right, well, so we're continuing through like the XY generation. This is definitely Super Mystery Dungeon is definitely an XY generation game. It's got those Pokemon, those mechanics and stuff. And we've got one more to do. So yes, our next discussion is going to be Pokemon Go, which we are considering a side game for the purposes. Now, yes, technically speaking, there is Pokemon Rumble World came out in like late 2015 or early 2016 or whatever. I think our plan is we're going to lump that in with a mobile game like Magikarp Jump or something like that, or possibly with the mobile Pokemon Rumble game. But yeah, so our next discussion is going to be Pokemon Go and its music. And boy, is there a lot to cover there. Since this game, 8 years on, is still getting updates and whatnot, and it has had stuff from its own music, stuff from the game, stuff from Ed Sheeran, stuff from... We're going to have some interesting choices to pick out. And, remember this episode, the first thing we usually talk about is, do you remember when this game was coming out and stuff like that? I think we're going to have some things to say for when we discuss this. But that is our discussion for next time. And this is chronologically the last XY side game. But you're going to have to wait a little bit for that one. But until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. Okay, so give us a second here. So we're going to do our usual game discussion because there was a lot to discuss game-wise with this one.
Yes.
In part, both looking backwards and hopefully forwards. I really hope there are more stuff there. Let us know, by the way, if you're in the chat or if you're watching this on replay. Please let us know if there were any songs we missed. There probably were.
There were a lot.
I did not get through in my replay of unlocking all the music that was new to this game. I guess I should also mention there's also some stuff from the GBA and DS games that's remixed, which I think would serve as the basis for the Rescue Team DX tracks in there. So they sort of were, I don't know if planning ahead is the right word, but setting the groundwork for that, I guess. I don't know. But I think they reused some of that for that purpose.
Okay, I'm going to run and get a drink of water real quick. I'll be right back.
Yeah, we usually do a quick water break. I think I've still got a little bit here. So Anne takes a break, and I get to stick around here as the opposite of what we usually do. But that was a great story about the thing there. I always want to learn more about these things, and it sort of tracks. I'd love to know. So the Billy Piper song from the first movie soundtrack, "Making My Way," we talk about it a lot, considering it's not actually technically in the movie, but it's also not an opening or ending to anything either. I do kind of wonder how that came in, but I did want to point out, just back in June, I think it was late June, they finally got the single that has that. It's a little different from the version on the Pokemon album in terms of mixing and vocal looping and stuff like that, but definitely Something Deep Inside is the name of Billy Piper's single that has Making My Way as the B-side. So that is finally on digital services. I do kind of hope they're doing something for the 25th anniversary of the Western release of the first movie, but hopefully they announce it soon because, that's coming up in November. All right, Anne. So So as usual, we're going to have a game discussion. So leave a little bit of pause, and I will introduce that. All right. Well, now that the music is out of the way, at least for the most part, we can talk about Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon, the game and gameplay, and all the other aspects of it, because there is a lot to talk about there. First of all, we sort of discussed in our Gates to Infinity discussion that we think, yes, that game has some things that are a little disappointing, but it is not a bad game. This one does try to improve that. You do have your survey, as usual, and a wide selection of Pokemon. You can also just go direct and pick yourself and your partner for that game, so that's an option. Let's see, it does use the 3D, but it doesn't use like the gyro sensor or the camera for much of anything. So if that was parts of Gates to Infinity you didn't like, that's not there. And one thing we didn't mention in our Gates to Infinity discussion, people kind of were unhappy with the text display speed in there, and I think that's been improved so that the fastest setting here is faster than the fastest setting in Gates to Infinity. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And did you notice some of that stuff when you were playing through?
Besides what? Sorry?
So all the little changes there, did you notice a lot of that when you were playing through, or?
I didn't get to play a lot through. I did notice that like I didn't like the gyro camera as much, so like that was nice. Yeah, I didn't find myself getting bogged down by text, so I guess it must have, if they made it go faster, it must have worked. Yeah, like there were a little tiny things that like I didn't really think about until I like started reading reviews, and then I was like, oh yeah, in the previous mystery dungeon this was like that. So yeah, like I didn't notice, and I think that's the strength, if that makes sense. Like because the tiny little tweaks they made worked really well, I didn't notice them. I just had fun playing. And I think that was the goal.
Yeah, a lot of those are kind of quality of life, rather than major.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Or not major is probably not the right word, but you get the idea what I'm saying there. As far as mechanics, well, first off, this is a XY Generation 6 game, and as such, it has the big mechanic from their Mega Evolution, which actually does show up in like X or in Rescue Team DX, and occasionally shows up in stuff like added to Go within the last year or two, so on and so forth. So that one seems to keep coming. But sort of one of the other big mechanics here is there are these things, these held items called loopits, and they take these things called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these remotely correctly, emeras. And did you get to play around with that when you went through some dungeons?
No, I did not make it very far at all. So no, I didn't try them too much.
Yeah, some of the very first dungeons don't seem to use them, but you get introduced to them through the school segment, which you should probably talk about a little bit as well. Basically, what these are held items, and they have a certain number of slots, which varies depending if you have the basic loopit, some other loopits. There are ones that like prevent certain status conditions, raise certain stats, and stuff like that. But then you find these emera, or however it's pronounced, lying around the dungeons, and there's a couple things with them. First of all, when you enter a room and there's one of those there, you have to get to it within a certain number of turns, or it will shatter. So that's a bit of a decision-making process there. And then each one of them has a sort of power. And there are some really good ones in there. Some of the best ones I can think of are Type Bulldozer, so that means you can hit with moves that would normally be either resisted or outright prevented by Type, and get the full power out of them. Another good one is Berry Power, which prevents a lot of secondary effects of moves and stat modifications from opponents' attacks there. There's ones that stop any status. There's one for individual status conditions out there. Let's see. What are some of the other really good ones, though? There's one that there's Trap Proof, which, of course, in Mystery Dungeon games, not as Pokemon, but all the whole series, as you get later into the game, more and more of those traps show up, and you can potentially, if you're lucky, get that one to block it for that character. You do have to make some decisions because you have a limited number of slots for the most part. And And if your Lupin is full up and you don't want to replace one, you can always use it on a character to get a stat boost, which is also quite nice. So that I think adds a fair bit of depth. They didn't bring that back for the remake on Switch of their first two Rescue Team games. I guess that one other one I should mention is the Awakening Emera, which is the one that triggers, first of all, Mega Evolution, and then for all other Pokemon, it gives them into the superpowered state where they can block attacks from the front and other stuff like that for a limited time. So it does definitely make it feel a little bit of a different game than some of the previous ones and gives it a little bit of a different feel. I don't know, Anne, if you had had a chance to experiment with those, do you think you would have found them interesting?
Yeah, I think like it's kind of weird because like the gameplay of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, like it's fun, but I'm here for the plot. So I think I would have liked to experiment with them. Um, I think I don't know. I think the main thing for me is that like it's true that I didn't make it very far, but like you, by all accounts, you had to really go through it. Like they kind of slowly dropped your plot in among all the things. So I wonder if like I'm interested in like all the aspects you listed. I hope it would have made it interesting enough if I had been playing this game for hours and hours and hours to get my story. If it would have kept my attention or if it would have started to feel like a chore. But that might just come down to personal taste. Like I said, I didn't make it very far, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, so that's well. As far as you alluded a little bit to the content and story of this game, there's a lot of content here. First of all, this
Mm.
has, at least at the time, I guess, all 720 Pokemon or
Yes.
whatever, however they're counting it there, because it has like all the different unknown variations and things like that. So, ton of stuff there. We might talk about it a little more. But as far as sort of the characters, we talked about the school. That's where you kind of start. It is like a literal tutorial, kind of like Shadows of Almia. And some people, I think, like your character is literally referred to as a kid by other uh, grown-up Pokemon within the game, and some people did kind of feel that was a little bit being insulting, I guess, but I think most people were kind of okay with it, and it made structural sense. I don't think it maybe slowed down the game too much, but there's a lot in there. Any thoughts about that school arc or that kind of use of that mechanic in games in general, Am?
I kind of love the idea of um kind of establishing different ages of Pokemon. I like the idea of them being at a school. Um I like the idea that some of them look down on you like you're a kid. Like I don't know, it just kind of I like things that kind of bring relatability to the world of the Pokemon characters as opposed to the human characters, without being like Pokemon are animals and they are just like pets. I like things that kind of give them their own sort of culture. Especially in a game like Mystery Dungeon where you can hear their thoughts in perfect understandability. So like yeah, like again, just the idea that they all go to a school, the idea that some are the elders and some are young kids. I don't know, I like that. I think it adds an interesting dimension to your character and the characters you interact with.
Yeah. Now we're not going to be able to go into all the characters because there are a lot of them. Both, first of all, in Serene Village, but also in Lively Town and in the rest of the game. There, I do want to point out that since you are a kid, both you and your partner Pokemon both have a parent of sorts. I don't want to go too into it because I don't want. Well, we're going to spoil the end boss in this one because I want to talk about that. But seeing their different parenting styles is pretty interesting, and especially given some of the stuff that happens later in the game, like I said, without spoiling too much. And then you eventually meet this sort of expedition squad. So because there's more than one like town location, there's a higher emphasis on exploring itself. And so you get to meet those folks, and they have a leader, an Ampharos, a little different from Guildmaster Wigglytuff, but a little spaced out there. But there's a pretty good cast of characters. I think they're used fairly well throughout the game. And you said you only got to play a little bit. Did you look through or let's plays of some of maybe the later parts of the game to get a better idea? Or
I did go through some let's plays. I don't know if I got the full scope of the game just because, like you said earlier, there is a lot of plot. But I did try to at least look at some different areas and different parts, and like it just seems to be like just such a massive. There's so much in this game. Like you could spend rather a long time exploring everything and interacting with all the Pokemon and going through all the stories. So, yeah.
yeah, so we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit about the final boss because I think it's one area of the game that's maybe not the most creative. So, the final boss of the game is this thing called Dark Matter, which is this kind of blob slash sphere slash depending on what form it's in, that is an embodiment of hate and negative feelings. Does that sound at all familiar to people who've played Gates to Infinity? I don't know if this is the Pokemon Company having a no evil Pokemon rule, because you find out it's been controlling some of the characters in the game to get them to do its bidding and so on and so forth. And you can't have they seem to have maybe a rule about that with some of the movies and other parts of the franchise and stuff. Like it's humans who cause the problem, which is odd because in the Mystery Dungeon games, someone gets turned from a human into a Pokemon to usually solve whatever problem is going on. I'm not sure if that's a conscious effort to kind of flip it, but most of the conflict in the other areas of the franchise does come from humans and what they do. So I'm not sure if that was to do that and they had to put that in there at the end or what, but I don't know. That may explain why some of these side games have a non-Pokemon final boss or whatever. But mechanically, it's a two-phase boss battle, and during the second phase, actually, all your Lupits get their Emera stripped from them, so you don't have those to work with. But it does this interesting thing where it actually, you see these markings on the floor, and you realize you have to go to ones that are unmarked to be safe from some of the bosses' attacks. So that I found actually interesting from a mechanical perspective. But even though it speaks quite differently, I think I'd have to look at what the Bitter Cold did in Gates to Infinity. But it does feel a bit like a retread there, and I'm hoping if we do get another Mystery Dungeon game, they can find a way to make something suitably different from that problem there.
I don't necessarily know that the issue is like a no bad Pokemon rule so much as I think in modern day there has been a trend in all types of storytelling to move away from the classic villain and this is a bad person doing bad things and a lot more into the nuance of what is making the person do the bad things and the metaphor of negative energy is kind of brainwashing you in a way. It's kind of making you do things you might not normally do when you're in your happy, relaxed state. Like, I wonder if it might more be just the trend of society in our storytelling, because that is a pattern I've noticed through a lot of different media, not just Pokemon, but also like other anime and Disney and like superhero storytelling all across society. So it could be a bit of a twofold. It could be a bit of both, a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, I mean, even technically speaking, though, if someone is, not, irredeemable as a villain, that doesn't mean you can't understand their motivations. But I do wonder if brand management kind of forced them to rehash that. Because I'll spoil a little bit else. The sort of the big bad Pokemon that is sort of, I guess, Dark Matter's left hand man or whatever is Yveltal. Yveltal, or however it's pronounced. I have to double check that one.
I think it's with so many different languages acting upon this made up word. I think it's kind of a choose your own adventure.
It should be correct in the anime, but I don't feel like booting up.
Well, again, correct is like an English an American English pronunciation versus a Japanese pronunciation
Yeah.
versus a European English like again, you say it however your heart tells you, Stephen.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's, but I don't know. I think there's ways you can do that conflict without having it being, I don't know. In any case, as far as the breadth of content, boy, there's a lot. Like I said earlier, all the Pokemon from up to this point are in the game. That includes all regular Pokemon, all legendaries, all mythicals are in some way, shape, or form obtainable within this game, up through obviously XY generation. And as a result, they kind of sometimes they give them to you several at a time, rather than the single recruitment you would get in some of the other games. Some of them you'll find wandering around dungeons as what's called a traveling Pokemon, which is good to find because they'll actually refill your health and moves and belly and stuff, which another mechanic that's in pretty much all the dungeons again is the belly, although some of them are still so short it doesn't matter that much. Um, and other ones, you'll have to fight. Sometimes they'll invite you to your secret base, which might be a fun time or a monster house. So on and so forth. There's one I remember, Genesect is in this game, and that dungeon is all Genesect all the time, which is a little bit weird. So cramming all that in there. I mean, they do some good stuff. Like there's a Lugia battle that I haven't re-gotten to, but I seem to remember. I think they tried to get as close to Pokemon 2000 as they could legally without having to pay money, but. But they have some nice columns and stuff in there to make it a little bit look like the shrine there. But yeah, so much stuff in here, and I guess maybe that's part of, I don't know, maybe it's too big of a game in some ways there. There's a lot I could say mechanically about this, but I do want to keep moving here, and, this is the last original Mystery Dungeon game. Or I should say original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game. There's been other entries in the series since then, and there's been a remake of the Red and Blue Rescue Team on Switch. Now, as we're recording this, the Red Rescue Team was put on Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, the GBA version, and might be hoping that would lead to something, especially since we're not sure how long we're waiting for Legend ZA, speaking of X and Y. But, it would be nice. I sure hope there's another entry in the future. There's been little rumors and stuff out there, but nothing concrete. And I do kind of hope, if there is another entry in this series, first of all, I want them to do some more mechanical stuff. Because if it's just what they did in Rescue Team DX, yes, they've modernized a lot of stuff from those games into there. But I would like to see some more things. I think they're going to have to take maybe some more risks or stuff. One rumor out there is that they're working on a machine learning thing so that the dungeons can be more complicated and less. They are randomly generated, but they are kind of, you'll notice the same room shapes that have appearing over and over again, and maybe they've been flipped horizontally or vertically, and they have little tunnels between them that are rearranged differently. But you can see some definite patterns out there, and I'm wondering if they're trying to make it in the next entry, if there is one, that there is more organic variety, maybe depending on the type of dungeon. And that's another mouthful there. But what are your kind of thoughts?
I definitely agree about more variety in the dungeons. I didn't, like I said, I didn't play it that far, but a lot of people, when I went looking at the Let's Plays or when I went on Reddit, kind of talk about sometimes it feels a bit like grinding, but I noticed a lot of other people really loved the dungeons, so maybe that's a minority opinion. But yeah, like more, I don't know. I feel with Pokemon and with the sheer amount of Pokemon we have now, there's so many interesting things you could do with dungeon crawls that, yeah, more innovation, more variety can only be a good thing and is certainly possible with this franchise that we have.
Yeah, like I said, I would like to see them try a few new things, and I'm sure that there's some ideas being batted around depending on what state the next game, if it exists, comes in. The other thing I want to point out here, do you think this game would benefit, since it is in many ways much closer to the main series games than any other side series, do you think this would benefit from Pokemon Home integration?
Oh, I don't. Hmm. I mean, well, it couldn't hurt it. I don't think. Um, How would you phew, go about that?
Yeah, because there's
Like,
some interesting questions. Because the like stat system in Mystery Dungeon and so on and so forth is a lot different
right?
than it is in the main series. Like you can buff stats incredibly high if you want to like use citrus berries
Yeah.
and whatnot to buff. There's a Pokemon's HP. You can go incredibly high, and they would obviously have to. I mean, they made it work for games like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and games
Mm-hmm.
like Legends Arceus that have different combat slash battle systems
Yeah.
slash stat systems than the main series games. And even Pokemon Go itself has
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon Home integration. And they managed to make
Yeah.
it work for that. Also for like the 3DS Virtual Console game. So it's probably not impossible, but it would definitely take some thinking.
Yeah.
But I
It
do
could.
wonder about that and whether that is something, like to make it more interesting for the next
Yeah.
go around, assuming there is one. Like I said, I don't think they obviously haven't completely forgotten about it, but whether they're working on
Yeah.
something new, I sure hope they are.
Yeah, there's an interesting quality to the Mystery Dungeon series as opposed to other Pokemon games, integrating it with Pokemon Home in that a lot of the Pokemon you meet in this game have personalities established, like they are their own characters. Whereas like in like Legends Arceus and the like, you're meeting a quote wild Pokemon. Their personality is kind of something you imagine um what that individual Pokemon is like. But in this game, we meet an individual Snivy or whatever and talk to them and find out what they're like. And they have a whole inner life going on. So taking that Pokemon to Pokemon Home or vice versa and being able to interact with this established character is kind of an interesting opportunity.
Yeah. So in regards to like the remake there, I mean that technically I believe released during the Sword and Shield generation. But I don't remember. I don't think that had maybe it had regional forms from those games or something like that. But they
Mm-hmm.
didn't add a ton there, which was kind of unfortunate. So I would really like to see, it would be cool to see what would they do with the gosh, what is it in Scarlet and Violet? The past and future Pokemon, but there's a name for them.
Oh yeah, Miraidon and Koraidon.
Well, not just those, but like
Oh,
the Screamtail and
oh, I don't
Iron, whatever,
remember.
forever, all that stuff. And what are they going to do with that, presumably? Because there's been, 3 generations of Pokemon, Sun and Moon,
Yeah.
Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, since the last like fully new Mystery Dungeon game, and you gotta wonder, they're gonna at least hopefully pick up some of that stuff in there.
Yeah.
Gigantamax would be kind of interesting given the nature of the game, of course. Um, but I do hope there is something out there.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. There's oh goodness. Yeah, like given like just its cult status, I'd be surprised if there was nothing.
Yeah, so that's where we're kind of left at, folks, is we don't know what's coming next. I was hoping, if they weren't going to announce anything ZA related at Worlds, which if you look at the way that closing ceremony was structured, it does seem to leave a big hole at the end when you're announcing the next 2 years will be in the same U.S. state. But if that's what they got, if that happened because of the pandemic or something like that, so be it. But and then you don't announce anything about the game everyone's curious about, regardless of how competitive it is. Um, so there seemed to be a bit of a hole. I don't know if they got something pulled out from under them for a future Nintendo Direct or something, but there's that rumor that ZA is a hybrid Switch 2 game
Hmm.
that's going to launch alongside the new console next year or whatever.
I'm not ready for a new console. I can't afford this Nintendo.
Well,
Uh.
remember you're talking to someone who went to Hawaii, so so yeah, so we're in kind of a place like we don't know what's going on next. We don't know about any movies, animated or live action in production. Like aside from the main anime, the only video stuff we know is in production is the next set of concierge episodes, which they
Hmm.
also didn't have. Like, it would be nice to see at least some of that during Worlds or something like that. I did attend at Worlds. I want to mention here while we're here, since we have a somewhat anime-focused crowd. that I did get to go to a panel, no questions and no recording of it, but where they talked about some of the stuff from how Horizons is being localized and also Path to the Peak, the miniseries that came out last year. It's interesting. One thing they mentioned is that they are working quite directly in the production stage with the Japanese production team over
Oh,
at OLM.
yay.
Well, I'm guessing some of that comes from, first of all, there was that Sun and Moon episode that had to be banned outside of Japan effectively, or at least out of East Asia because of the cultural sensitivities involved there.
Hmm.
And I'm sure they weren't happy about that. And unlike when that happened, something similar happened in Black and White. That was the gym battle episode, so they forked over the money to reanimate it. This one, couldn't be bothered.
Right.
Not as important, I guess. But and maybe some stuff that happened with, say, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. Like, I know that some people like that it may have had a few more elements from the Japanese version, but I think the general consensus is it was missing a lot from the 99 dub people wanted. So that might be part of it as well. But no real news on that. We know that, like, doing the end arc of the Ash Ketchum story took up a lot of resources with people coming in and out very frequently to get that thing done. So that's
I know.
one thing. But
Gary's voice actor came out of retirement for like.
You mean his Japanese voice actor?
Yeah, the actress. Like she was like done. She was like off on an island. Like nobody knew where this person was. She was out of the industry. It's like I wasn't even sure she was alive like until Gary came back.
Yeah, so it's a big question mark is about what's going to kind of happen going forward with either the animated side or the live action side, because that Detective. We'll talk more about the Detective Pikachu movie when we get to the Detective Pikachu game. Technically, I believe that isn't actually an XY generation game, but because we go by English or Western release date, that doesn't come out till like 2018. So it's going to be a little while before we get to that. But I'm definitely looking forward to Go as our next discussion topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to talk about there with all the stuff they've done from, like I said, the original music for it, the game music, like like for October or Halloween, they usually do the Lavender Town. They have a remix. They've done some weird vocal stuff with, I don't know if it was Haven Pashal and Ed Goldfarb. They did some stuff for that. Ed Sheeran, before he did they announced he was going to do the Celestial, just kind of nuts stuff they've done with that game. And there's the whole fidelity aspect where they've been progressively lowering the fidelity of the music, it seems, to make the app smaller or whatever. But we'll have a ton to talk about. Thank you to everyone who showed up for this. We always appreciate that. Give us a comment and stuff like that. All right, folks.
Bye.